TKO Boxing with Sherry Abbasi. Today I'm joined by a legend of boxing journalism and a commentator whose voice has inspired generations in the sport of boxing, Mr. Jim Lampley. Mr. Lampley, first of all, thank you and your wife, Deborah Lampley, for giving me a bit of your time today. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, and great to be with you, Sherry.
Thank you so much once again. Am I okay to call you Jim? I didn't clarify that beforehand.
What?
Am I okay to call you by your first name?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Jim, I think first things first, please, if you don't mind, I'd like to start off with you just having the floor and talking us through your book, please, that's been released. I've seen some reviews online. If you'd like to just let us know the story behind the book, please.
Well, I had sort of done everything else. I'm pretty sure that there are quite a number of people who arrive at the prospect of writing a book somewhat the same way I did, which was that I cycled through all of the major possibilities in my broadcasting career for decades. I experienced all the things that I experienced in a uniquely lucky life for decades. I came back to my university alma mater at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill and taught a course that I created and developed for 5 semesters until I got tired of the generation gap between me and present day students. I thought that my blow-by-blow ringside career in boxing had come to a conclusion, given the fact that after the new owners of HBO decided to exit the boxing franchise, nobody asked me to call any fights for a few years. And then eventually things turned in the other direction, and Turki Al-Sheikh arrives in the sport to create his own spheres of influence and decides that he wants me to call fights at ringside. We had a meeting. He persuaded me to come back. And I called the fights in Times Square a few weeks ago, such as they were and what there was of them. And now just back here at home in Chapel Hill, dealing with all of the details of having written a book. You know, you sort of start with the premise of, okay, can I really write a book? Am I going to be able to finish it? Will I like it? Et cetera, et cetera. Check the box on all of those things. But then the real work begins, because now you have to go out on the road and promote the book and travel and sign a bunch of autographs and stuff like that. It is fun. It is rewarding, but it is work too. So that's what I've been doing for the past several weeks.
Thank you for that. I think it's interesting how even someone with your level of experience can say, I wasn't sure if it would work. So, for example, a lot of your career has been camera facing or audio. That's what we know you for. So it's interesting to see that even with your experience, you have to ask these sort of questions of yourself. What were the main challenges you found with writing a book?
Well, it wasn't as challenging as I expected it to be, because early on, I settled on a method, and the method was that I would not do notes. I would not do an outline. I would write the book more or less free form from memory, and employ the muses, the twin muses of my paternal grandmother and my mother, in effect, each one of them whispering in an ear at night and, you know, telling me the way that they would tell my story. And then I would sit down the following day and try to write what had come into my mind as the result of that. So it was a stream of consciousness process. I wouldn't recommend it for everybody, but the way my life has gone, and particularly the way those 2 women inoculated me with their storytelling, made it the right way for me to write the book.
Amazing. Thank you. And in terms of actually ordering the book, for example, I'm assuming it's available in USA and Canada. How would people in the UK get their hands on it? Would it be through Amazon, or is it available at like local bookstores as well? Do you know?
You can get it on Amazon. You can get it from the Barnes and Noble website. I have to assume maybe there's an alert bookstore or 2 in London or Manchester or Liverpool who are stocking the book. If not, you can ask the desk how to order this book from Ben Bella Books. Ben Bella Books is a boutique publisher and a division of Holt in New York. Holt is one of the biggest publishing companies. And, you know, just Google Jim Lampley and the words "it happened." You should be able to figure out a way to buy this book.
Sure. Thank you. Before we move on, is there anything else you want to say to the fans about the book?
Just that the book is largely about my love affair with boxing and the unusual and counterintuitive way in which I became a ringside boxing broadcaster. And you probably know, Sherry, that a part of the foundation of the book is that the person who assigned me to boxing at ABC Sports was doing it to try to get rid of me. He thought that the sport would embarrass me. I would be a cultural misfit in boxing. And he had no idea that the very first sports event my mother had ever sat me down to watch when I was 6 years old, 1 year after my father died, was Sugar Ray Robinson versus Bobo Olson for the middleweight championship of the world. So boxing was the very first sport with which I was inoculated. And, to assign me to boxing, thinking that's a way to embarrass me and get rid of me, it was really kind of comical. But he didn't know. And eventually I did walk out of that network and wound up working at the most prestigious network that covered boxing, which is, of course, HBO. 30 years at HBO. What a gift. What a blessing. Thank you very much to the executive who forced me out at ABC.
They say when one door closes, another opens, and that seems to be exactly what happened for you.
Irony. Yeah, don't draw any conclusions just because something unexpected just happened. It might be the best possible thing.
100%. And sorry I hope you don't mind me asking the question here. You mentioned obviously that your father passed away when you were quite young, 6 years old, and then obviously you started watching boxing. I'm assuming you must have watched it before that, but you have that memory there. How much did the sport of boxing, if at all, help you to cope with the loss of your father, or did it not?
Well, it made me feel close to him because my mother, when I was 6 years old, took me to a neighbor party less than a year after my father died, walked me down the hall, put me in a guest bedroom in front of a tiny television set, said, sit here. You're going to watch the Gillette Friday night fights. It's Sugar Ray Robinson versus Bobo Olson for the middleweight championship of the world. You're going to do this because if your father was still alive, this is what you would be doing. And this is where you would be doing it with him. And oh, by the way, the last thing she said before she left the room, Sugar Ray Robinson is my favorite fighter. He dances while he fights. Now, to dissect that, you have to understand the unpredictability of my mother, raised in a poor Irish American household in Memphis at the height of post-Civil War racism in America, raised by two parents who were definitely white racists and did not know how to pronounce the word Negro. For that woman to be saying to her son, Sugar Ray Robinson is my favorite fighter. He dances while he fights. There's something in that. Something changed my mother. Something converted her from one thing, which her parents had taught her, to completely the opposite. And she literally schooled me and trained me all of my upbringing years through teenage years into college to be an anti-racist. And that was a tremendous gift to me, because I don't know how anybody could have put together the kind of sportscasting career I had for 50 years, going from the 70s into the 2020s, if he had, in America, if that person had been a racist, it couldn't have happened. You had to be anti-racist in order to succeed in that environment during that period of time. So that was, as it turned out, the biggest and most ironic gift that my mother gave to me. I don't know that my father's family would have pushed that in the same way, but she did. And after the Sugar Ray Robinson part, she directed me to an amateur fighter at the Olympics in Rome in 1960, and his name was Cassius Clay. And I began memorizing and lying awake thinking about everything Cassius Clay did and said. And that led to me going to my very first live prize fight in Miami Beach, February 25, 1964, Cassius Clay's upset win over Sonny Liston. And that led to 2 days later when he stood on a street corner in Miami and told two reporters, I'm a follower of the Nation of Islam and my name is Muhammad Ali. So I had to go through a lot of perceptual changes all at once in my early youth to ultimately put myself in line with who I wanted to be and who my hero was. And I always say he taught me many lessons, Muhammad Ali. The first lesson he taught me was that a man's identity is his own. No matter how much I root for him, no matter how ardently I am a fan of that person, no matter how much I think his identity belongs partially to me, his identity is his. And if he says, my name is Muhammad Ali, my response is going to be, I'll call him Muhammad Ali. And I knew a lot of people who wouldn't, but that was all part of what my mother was teaching me as I was growing up. And he became a big part of it. And then ironically, decades later, babysat my 8-year-old daughter and brought her into that process too.
That's a full circle moment right there. Wow.
It was
That's
unbelievable. It was unbelievable. And it leads to she spent a whole day with him at the United States Boxing Writers Association luncheon in New York. And then late that night after the dinner, I was taking her home to her mother's apartment in a cab. And she turned to me and said, Dad, who was that guy? And I said, well, you'll grow up, you'll read about him, you'll learn all about it. It's really an amazing story. It's an important thing for you to know. And the last thing I'll leave you with before you go to bed is he's the most famous man in the world. And there can be no dispute. There's nobody with a logical case against that. He's the most famous man in the world. And she said, you mean that I just spent hours of card tricks and magic tricks and sitting and talking with the world's most famous man? And I said, yes, you did. So that gave her a sense of her own self, her own importance, her own stature that has led to big things in her life. Someday she'll write her book, and that will be a part of it as well.
That was, honestly, thank you so much for sharing that. That was beautifully put, and so interesting to hear that. That boxing's not just for you; it's for your parents. You and now even your daughter has had such such an important experience through the sport as well, like with someone like Muhammad Ali. That's amazing to hear, honestly.
All the continuity of it, yeah. If you wrote it as a novel, it's a pretty interesting fictional plot, but it happened. It was real.
Through the generations, exactly. To just sort of touch on Muhammad Ali, since we've mentioned him there, I believe, I could be wrong, and I hope I'm not make a fool of myself here. Is it 9 years this month since he's passed away? I'm pretty sure he passed away June 2016, yes. Didn't he? So it's just crazy.
Since he passed
away. So we can't understate the impact of someone like Muhammad Ali to transcend the sport.
Not only is it 9 months this month since he passed away, but then you bring in the Foreman angle, because the title of my book is from my call of his knockout of Michael Moore. That call happened because of the things he had been telling me for weeks leading up to the fight, assuring me that at some moment late in the fight, Moore was going to come stand in front of him and let him knock him out. Always the same words. He will let me knock him out. And when the count was reaching 10, I'm thinking, oh my God, this is a called shot. I can't believe that exactly what he told me has just taken place in front of me. So that became, it happened. And it happened became the title of the book. And George, my friend, my colleague, someone to whom I got closer after I called his win over Moore, died 2 weeks before the publication of the book. And the title comes from my call of his fight. The prologue, which is the first thing I wrote that you read in the book, is all about the 19-year-old me watching the 19-year-old him win his Olympic gold medal in Mexico City in 1968. It was the first thing I put into the book. And, and so for this to happen is so ironic and poignant that he departs just at the moment that the book is being published, when he's so much a part of it. It's amazing. It's almost as though the universe wrote this script in every detail for me to consecrate my life and to promote my book. And, I couldn't feel more odd and gifted by the whole process.
Absolutely. And like you said, the timing of that, you literally cannot predict or write that the way that's happened with George Foreman.
I mean, off the board, it's just, you couldn't possibly have written a script and said, okay, this is what's going to happen. Foreman died 2 weeks before publication, And by the way, it's so funny. He used to call me young man. He called me young man all the time. We're working together at HBO and he calls me young man. 3-4 times a day. And I would say, George, you're born on January 12, 1949. I'm born on April 8, 1949. We are fewer than 3 months apart. I am not very much younger than you. And he'd say, yeah, but you're such a young man. And he just kept calling me young man. 3 months difference.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Just to touch on the fact that we've mentioned three, fighters that are considered all-time greats in Sugar Ray Robinson, Muhammad Ali, and George Foreman. For yourself, Jim, you've seen so many great fighters that are considered all-time greats up close and covered so many over the years. It's always down to opinion. But what would you say makes a fighter an all-time great fighter?
What makes a fighter an all-time great fighter? Step one is respect for the sport and respect for your opponents and recognition that this is a fraternity and everybody's in it together. And if you open your heart and feel the right things, you're going to wind up, after all these fights are over, loving your opponents, being brothers with them, sharing the kind of respect that is unique to a face-to-face combat type sport. One thing I always tell uninitiated fans, people who don't spend a lot of time around boxing, when you see two guys going at each other tooth and nail for 12 rounds, seeming to try to kill each other with their gloved fists, when you see Arturo Gatti versus Mickey Ward, or Marco Antonio Barrera versus Eric Morales, or any of the Riddick Bowe versus Evander Holyfield, when you watch the fights that have that level of violence and commitment and contact and pain, you're watching two guys fall in love with each other. You're watching them become blood brothers. By the time those 12 rounds are over, they know each other better than anybody in the world, except maybe their mothers. And even their mothers don't know how they react when they are forced to experience close-up, face-to-face pain. And the moment, I always tell uninitiated fans, the moment when you watch those two fighters fall into each other's arms after the conclusion of the combat, that's real. That is not fake in any way, shape, or form. That is real, and that is love, because they cannot engage in that kind of face-to-face combat without engendering respect, recognition, and eventually something like love. Evander Holyfield wound up being Riddick Bowe's caretaker in an apartment in South Florida. Riddick Bowe was sliding southward, as people in these sports will do. Evander was concerned about him. They got an apartment together, and Evander became his minder, taking care of Riddick Bowe. That can only happen with fighters. It wouldn't happen with people in other sports. And I think that that's because they go to the edge of the worst kind of thing, and what they find is love.
Thank you so much once again. Your way with words, it's actually mesmerizing just sitting here talking to you, listening to you. Thank you so much. Mr. Lampley, if you don't mind, let's touch a little bit on HBO and what a big part that played in your, not just your career, but your life and as a human being, how that's affected you. Like you said, 30 years with HBO, a big chunk of your life, so many countless memories, the fights you would have called, the amount of memories you have created for other people with your words. How important was HBO as an institution to you, not only as an employee, but as a human being?
Well, HBO is special. I not only wound up getting to call fights for by far the preeminent boxing network of that era, but also I was the weekday host of 6 hours a day of Wimbledon telecasts from the All England Lawn Tennis Club, and spent several summers in London covering Wimbledon. So it was a tremendous gift. It was by far the pinnacle of boxing television at the moment when I went there, and the greatest thing that ever happened in my career. And all the ironic product of an executive at ABC who thought that by assigning me to boxing, he could get rid of me. But he did. I walked out of ABC, but I walked into the most prestigious television network ever to program boxing, and stayed there for 30 years.
Beautiful. Thank you so much once again. There's one that I always remember, and I'm going to read it back to you if you don't mind. Something you said, it's always stuck with me, and it's one that I've actually got saved in my notes since the 3rd of December 2017. I don't know if you remember what happened around that date, but I'll read it out to you anyway. Boxing is the most human of sports. It's the only sport in which you lose a little bit every time you win. It's the sport in which you can earn the heart of every single fan in the arena, even when you lose. Through his 47 fight career, of all the fighters we have covered in the 21st century, Miguel Cotto was the most visibly human. He fought every single round with his heart on his sleeve, and that's why our hearts are with him tonight. That one, every time I hear it or I see it written there, I get goosebumps. It pulls the heartstrings.
Well,
Absolutely
it's inevitable.
beautiful.
It's inevitable that some fighters are going to get a little bit deeper into your heart than some others. And I defy anybody who ever met Miguel Cotto to say anything negative whatsoever about him. He's one of those shining, soulful, spectacularly loving human beings. I recognized it in the first fighter meeting. I watched him with his father over and over and over. I kind of envied him because my father died when I was 5, and he had a visible, great, loving, warm relationship with his father. Not all fighters do. And there's a lot of poignancy in Miguel's career. He was the victim of the most violent and rank injustice I ever saw in the ring. The night that he was beaten up with loaded gloves and his life was threatened by Antonio Margarito in Las Vegas. And so, I had a special bond with Miguel. And I remember constructing those words on the fly as I was saying them, just by way of establishing what it was that was special about him in my eyes.
I think you conveyed a very beautiful message there. So honestly, that's one thing of many in boxing that I think will stick with me for life. Like I said, I've had that saved in my notes for almost 8 years now, and I go back to it regularly and read it. It's beautiful. Thank you for that.
You're a good audience. Thank you.
For yourself, obviously, I think it's important to touch on this, not only for me and you in this conversation, but I think for anyone who watches this, who has ever struggled with anything in life, I think it's important to speak as men about these type of things. One thing about you that I've always admired, purely as a fan, as a boxing fan, and as a man as well, is that you've never been ashamed or hesitant to show your emotions. And what I mean by that is there's been so many occasions where you've visibly gotten, choked up or emotional during a broadcast when speaking about something. Where does that come from, and why has it always been in your mind okay to do so?
I never made any decision that it was okay to show my emotions. Okay. That was not a constructed path. That's just me. And, I don't want to say the most obvious thing about it, but some people would see this as obvious. I was raised by women, not by men. Yeah. I was raised by my mother and my grandmother, and I was always encouraged to show emotion. We were a family full of people who cried and laughed. And, there was a famous basketball coach here in the United States named Jimmy Valvano, basketball coach at North Carolina State University down the road from where I am. And he died of cancer. And when he was dying, he made a famous speech at a dinner. And one of the things he said in the speech is if in any given day you laugh and you cry and you feel something that lifts your heart, you feel something that breaks your heart, and you share something with a neighbor and you share something with a relative, it was a beautifully expressed thing. And he, the climax was, that's a full day. That's what life is about. So you could put a gun to my head and say, don't show your emotions, and it's just not going to happen. I'm not capable. And it used to embarrass me, and it used to take me off stride, et cetera, et cetera. And eventually enough people said to me, Jim, that's what people like about you. Don't be ashamed of that. Don't push back against it. That's who you are. People feel it. People know it. That's what they like about you. Does it still embarrass me? Sure it does. I would love to have such complete control of my emotions that you wouldn't see tears coming out of my eyes right now. But some of these stories, Miguel Cotto in particular, I can't think about it without getting choked up.
I think it's honestly, I think it's very admirable. I think it's beautiful. I myself, similar to yourself, was raised by my mother and my grandmother. So I was raised by women. So when people say you're quite soft, Sherry, it's because I was raised by women. So I was taught to say I love you every day and to share, laughter, tears, all these things.
You and me both. You and me both. Okay. Yeah.
Exactly. So
And,
at least I can say I've
I
got that in common with you.
count myself lucky, really. I mean,
Hmm.
my father was, I'm sure, a great man. I was 5 when he died, but I know for certain that my mother and my grandmother were great women. So I was raised by people with real strength and real emotional core, and that helped.
Once again, thank you so much for bearing your soul and being so honest and genuine. Um, I wanted to know for you, Jim. Obviously, HBO sort of wrapped up in 2018. How much of a loss has that been to the boxing world? Because I know for a fact we all miss it very deeply. But how can we put it into words?
Well, the evolution of the television transmission of boxing matches has shifted and moved from target to target constantly over the years. You could say that the absolute heyday of boxing as a fan attraction in America is during the Gillette Friday Night Fights period, when Don Dunphy is calling a couple fights on Gillette Friday Night Fights every week, and they feature the star fighters in the welterweight, middleweight divisions. Sugar Ray Robinson is in the mix. Eventually, you get to the young Cassius Clay, etc. That was a particular form of predictable transmission, network television. There were only 3 networks. It wasn't confusing. You knew where to find the fights every time you turned it on. 90 minutes on Friday night, Don Dunphy was going to tell you what you needed to know about boxing. Then you get to the sports anthology series on ABC, NBC, and CBS. And all 3 networks are putting boxing on Saturday afternoon, but it's still network television. It's a normal financial pattern. A rights cost is being paid to the promoter. The fights are appearing, et cetera, et cetera. Then you get eventually to the pay-per-view era. And Ali Frazier won in Madison Square Garden in 1971, changes everything. Larry Merchant told me he was at ringside in Madison Square Garden as Ali and Frazier were preparing for the first round of their first 15-minute epic struggle. And Larry swore to me that as Ali was bouncing up and down, warming up, waiting for the opening bell, what he was saying to himself was $2.5 million, $2.5 million, $2.5 million. He couldn't believe that he was going to make $2.5 million for one fight. Now it sounds like a pittance, right? Compared to what people are making, because the distribution pattern was shrunk to intensify the payoff. So what ultimately that gets to is the bigger the fight, the smaller the number of people who are going to watch it. That's no way to build the grassroots of a sport. That is the way to capitalize financially on whatever punch that sport has left in this one event, one moment type world that we're living in. So all those things have gone on. Now you have this entirely new event where you have an influx of Arab money that is going to influence the sport in a somewhat different direction than what has taken place before. It's brought me back to ringside, but I can't predict what's going to happen next and what is going to be the outcome of all this. Will we ultimately reach a point where instead of every big fight taking place in Madison Square Garden or every big fight taking place at the MGM Grand, that every big fight takes place in Riyadh? I don't doubt it. Why not? If that's where the money is and that's where the interest is. So it's the most entrepreneurial sport, and therefore you can never predict what's going to happen next on the chessboard. And I just wait and see.
Sure. In terms of yourself coming back to the sport, Jim, what was your reaction when you got the call to be asked to come back, and are you glad that you have made that comeback essentially?
I was very eager to come back. I've been eager to come back for a long period of time. I like calling fights. I still thought I could call them. Turkey Al Sheikh agreed with that, had pretty much the same perception I had. This was an easy decision. We met in a hotel suite in New York. He said, "Do you want to call fights?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Done." So I came back for the Times Square triple header, quadruple header, whatever it was. Everything was forgettable. It was an unfortunate night in terms of spirited competition, but I came back. I did my job. I called the fights. I'm hoping to get some more chances to do that, but I have no concrete information yet as to whether I'll call other fights.
Sure, no worries.
That's up to him.
Yeah, of course. I think the feedback of hearing your voice, Jim, was very positive for everyone. It gives you that nostalgia factor and takes you back to 2018 and before for all the big fights. You're one of the voices that people associate with boxing. So I believe we're going to see you again and hear you again for sure. Whether that happens or not, obviously, like you said, that's in the hands of other people. But to touch on a fight that is upcoming in September, Canelo versus Crawford, a mega fight, which I'm sure you would love to be ringside for calling as well. And hopefully we do get to hear your voice as a part of that fight. What do you think of that fight as a fight itself? Because a lot of people are calling it, it's a bit of a freak fight because of the notion of, Crawford having to go up to 168 and Canelo being comfortable. What are your thoughts on the fight? And is it actually a genuine super fight?
I always respect the opinion of Larry Merchant. And I asked the now 94-year-old Larry Merchant what he thought of Crawford's chances against Canelo. And he said, "Did Ray Leonard get a decision over Marvelous Marvin Hagler?" And I said, "Yes, he did." He said, "Well, if Ray Leonard can get a decision over Marvelous Marvin Hagler, then Terence Crawford has a chance to get a decision over Canelo Alvarez. It's in many ways the same fight." So we'll see. I think it's a fight that Crawford has to anticipate trying to win by decision. Canelo has arguably the best punch resistance in the sport, but Crawford is so versatile, so quick, so able to adapt side to side, switch hitter, as a lot of writers now call him. I wouldn't count him out of any fight. And he's one of the steeliest and most committed competitors that I've ever met. In fact, I think in a lot of ways, he's the Sugar Ray Robinson of his generation. He has Robinson's confidence. He has Robinson's killer instinct. He has Robinson's hard competitive spirit.
That's some high praise for Terence Crawford there. I'm sure he'd appreciate that. Just before we wrap up, Jim, can I ask if you can remember your 3 favorite fights that you called ringside for HBO?
Gaddy Ward won. Barrera Morales won. Bo Holyfield won.
Wow, that's some list. And then finally,
better than that, right?
No, you can't. Yeah, exactly. There you go. And the fact that you got to call those, I'm very jealous. And then, just to wrap up the interview portion, the sport of boxing for people who maybe aren't as into the sport as, say, someone like yourself or someone like me and many other hardcore boxing fans around the world. What would you say the sport of boxing has to offer to a fan who is a casual looking to learn more about the sport?
The sport of boxing has to offer the most graphic and immediately available and understandable template for showing within sports competition what kind of human being you are. There is no other sport that undresses the athlete the way boxing does. And if you can withstand that undressing and still have the respect of the audience after you've done what you've done in the ring, then you should respect yourself, win or lose, because that's what the battle of life is all about. Can you make your statement? Can you stand your ground? Can you commit to a path and follow that path? All those things are at stake when you enter the ring to face off against another man, one-on-one. Unique sport, unique mental and emotional confrontation, unique experience to call the sport as a broadcaster.
Beautifully put. Thank you, Jim. The final question. I just thought of one now as you were saying that. For you yourself, Jim Lampley, the man, Jim Lampley, the commentator, the analyst, the journalist, however you want to refer to yourself as, what has the sport of boxing meant for Jim Lampley in his life?
Well, the sport of boxing has meant everything to Jim Lampley, from from the first moment my mother walked me down a hallway in Hendersonville, North Carolina, to put me in front of a TV dinner tray with a little tiny television set and say, you're going to watch Sugar Ray Robinson versus Bobo Olson for the middleweight championship of the world. And in the next 90 minutes, a man named Don Dunphy is going to teach you everything you need to know about boxing. From that moment forward, it's the most important sport in my life. Now, the people who assigned me to it at ABC, they had no idea. They thought that they were going to embarrass me because I would be following Howard Cosell into the boxing commentary chair. And there's no way that little Jim Lampley could possibly thrive in that particular shadow. But I did. And not only did I thrived enough that I wound up getting the ticket to go to HBO and call the fights on the largest platform and call Mike Tyson versus Buster Douglas and various other fights of that ilk. So, it was counterintuitive. It was not predictable. It happened. Because it happened, I have a book to sell and a story to tell. And on we go with what boxing has given to me. And I'll be back at the Boxing Hall of Fame for their induction ceremony in a few weeks because I honor and respect everything they do for boxing and everything they've done for me.
Mr. Lampley, as we wrap up, I just wanted to say from me, a massive thank you to yourself and Deborah, Mrs. Lampley, for allowing me to have a bit of your time. I grew up, like I said, listening. Yeah, it happened. There we go. That's the book we want to promote today as well. Available at Amazon and all local bookstores. If not, ask them where you can order it. Everywhere. I just wanted to say, like I said, I grew up on your listening to your voice. A lot of my boxing memories are sort of linked to you and your voice. And the fact that I had to have this one-to-one conversation with you and learn so much about you as a person as well, it was surreal and profoundly moving. I felt emotional at points. So I feel like I'm linked to you now. So thank you so much for that. And hopefully we will catch up with you again in the future to discuss boxing once again.